Hello. I want to welcome you to our podcast here featuring two of the clergy at First United Methodist Church. I'm Reverend Eric Strader here with
Reverend Carrie West.
And we are talking about our worship series right now that is about healthy relationships, how we're in relationship with one another, not only our intimate partners or our intimate relationships with friends, our family of origin, our family of choice, but also with one another, especially in this unique context of being a Christian community in the world. There's an old story about a couple lying in bed, and she, they're in their 80s, maybe early 90s. She rolls over and she said, "You never lie close to me anymore." So he groans and grunts and kind of rolls over to her. She says, "You never hold my hand anymore." So he moves his arm around, finds her hand, and holds her hand. She says, "You never nibble on my ear anymore." And he just lets out this enormous sigh, flings the covers off, groans to get out of bed. And she goes, "Where are you going?" And he says, "To get my teeth." It's a good one. I love jokes like that. But I think there is something, I think it's a great illustration for the love that we've been talking about the past 2 weeks, whether it's in conflict, whether it's in investing in our relationships, and this Sunday, whether it's about habits that create a healthy relationship, are about that we are centered and grounded in a self-sacrificing love. That the love of Jesus is not transactional. The love of Jesus is transformative. That the love of Jesus does not require a quid pro quo. You don't have to do anything. It is a relational love. And we are called to then live that way. And so how do we live that self-sacrificing love with one another in the world? And so you're going to read from Philippians for this Sunday.
Yeah, and so this is the second chapter of Philippians, and Paul writes these words. Christ encourages you, and his love comforts you. God's Spirit unites you, and you are concerned for others. Now, make me completely happy and live in harmony by showing love for each other. Be united in what you think, as if you were only one person. Don't be jealous or proud, but be humble and consider others more important than yourselves. Care about them as much as you care about yourselves, and think the same way that Christ Jesus thought.
So the context of the letter to the Philippians is the context of Paul's in prison in Rome. Mm-hmm. And again, he's transcribing. The letter has been carried to that community by a former slave of that community, most likely. It tells the story of that we're invited to have gratitude and to be humble. I think we talk a lot about humility in our world and in church, especially in church. What do we do in the context of relationships with humility? How does that play into self-sacrificing love for us?
I was struck as I was reading the be united in what you think, and how often we think that means we have to all believe and think exactly the same way. That's what it means to be united in how we think. That it's less about making sure that someone else thinks the same way we do, because that's when we get into those arguments or into unhealthy habits, because we just want people to think the same way we do. But that self-sacrificing is maybe an understanding. How do we think the same way in terms of how we have respect for each other, how we love one another? To be one with someone else is to have the same hope and the same trajectory of learning and growing and being in relationship with each other, not that we have to be exactly the same. So humility and self-sacrificing love for me really is about just not worrying about myself. How do I worry about this other person and what they think and what they feel and what they've been going through? And then how do we find relationship and alignment?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because we talk often about that concept, right, of understanding that someone may have a completely different experience of life, and they bring different challenges to life. And yet our Christian desire, need, history, rhythm to just, we judge out of everything, right?
Yeah.
We judge the failures of leaders. We judge what happens in our small groups. We judge everyone at every turn. We don't, our automatic response is not to offer grace in that moment. And I'm certainly guilty of that as well. I mean, we all step into that unhealthy pattern. And how I hear that the humility is tied to here to get from not being unified to finding unity, and I am differentiating between those two, and differentiating also I would between unity and uniformity, right. But humility is how we get there, and humility means checking our judgment and our condemnation and our you have to do it my way. Why didn't you do it this way? It's that we think we automatically know what's best or better for people. That's
Yeah. If I could share just a really quick real life kind of example of that. Last night, I attended the city council budget hearing. It was the public comment section of the budget, and part of the budget that's being proposed by the mayor is money for how we are in relationship with unhoused or the homeless in our community. And one of the specific things that is being asked for is public restrooms, so that folks have a place where they can, with dignity, do what everyone does.
right.
And there was a small business owner who got up to speak. And she talked about how she has to clean up the front of her business every single morning. And she said, which I will continue to do. It doesn't make me mad that I have to do this. What upsets me is that we aren't doing something to help these people find another way.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking for law enforcement. I'm asking that we help people,
right.
Not help me and my business, that we help people so they can have, I'm paraphrasing. She said it much better than I'm saying it, but it was, I think it was a message that was different from others that are just saying, I don't want to understand why folks are having to relieve themselves by my business. They're not asking the questions of what can we be doing and getting creative.
You hear the sacrifice in her statement. I'm willing to sacrifice every morning to clean this up. And I want us to do better. It's not an either or. It's not a condemnation of our unhoused and a condemnation of our political leaders. It is a let's find a way forward together. We talked about this a lot in September with our Do Unto Others series about we set up these scenarios where it is a win. Either side, I have to win. It's a win for everybody. It's a negotiation. It's a collaboration. It's a give and take. And that is the aspect of humility, is to give of your position, right? So that something else may come about. I think for Paul's going to talk a lot about in this in Philippians and in his theology about that God has put God's self out for God's people over and over, right? We think through the Hebrew Bible. How many ways did God try to be in relationship with us as a people, right? God tried the covenant, and then God tried to lead us out of slavery into the wilderness. Then God led us into the promised land. And then God gave us judges, and then God gave us kings, and then God sent the people into exile. And we've continued to deny and reject being in relationship with God. And so in our New Testament understanding, God sends this new way, this Son, Jesus Christ. What's fascinating when we think about humility is, to me at least, here we still deny Jesus, we still reject Jesus, and Jesus still chooses to redeem us in death, beyond death, that there is something there, that's not the end of the story. Even though we rejected Jesus' way, even though we rejected Jesus' teaching, even though the disciples betrayed and denied and left him utterly alone, he still chose that path. That's the ultimate act of self-sacrificing act of of love that Paul's inviting us into.
Mm.
And yet, you know, think about our lives and what we complain about and what we criticize about. And it's just so petty, the things that we experience and do. So, yeah. I I think it's that concept of how does humility lead you to sacrifice. So if you think about a marriage, in the lifespan of a marriage, 40 or 50 years, you think about that year 0 to 2 is that kind of honeymoon era. It's, it's the love is, I don't know, immature, I think is a way to say it.
It's more emotional.
It's more emotional. It's more passionate.
Yeah.
It's much less, it's not quite sacrificial, but it has this, I guess.
Yeah. C.S. Lewis wrote that very same thing, that the love that you have with your partner at the very beginning is something that cannot be maintained long term, because it's all of that emotion and energy that kind of comes from within the belly. Right. That eventually it has to move into that heart and head.
Right. So that's 0 to 2. 2 to 10, you most have kids, and so that is a very different experience of relationships, right? You are sacrificing so much during that time, but not for your partner. You're sacrificing for your kids. And what happens is, often we see with people, is then there's a sacrifice unintentionally of their relationship with their partner. So you think about that idea of sacrifice from 2 to 10. You think about 10 to 20, kids are growing up. Parents start to reconnect. They get to go on date nights now. They get to be in a relationship in a more mature way. There's that 20-year kind of reconnection thing. You get to 20 to 30 years and you get into menopause and manopause, and everybody's changing and figuring out who we are again in life. And then you get to that 30 and plus. And what I think is so interesting is I love the journey of 30 plus, because that's when love is actually sacrificial in a way that it never was beforehand, right? Especially in death or aging, when we think about people going into homes, or we think about couples, one's going into assisted living, one's going into memory care, life looks different, and you're reliant on one another in very different ways, right? One drives because the other one can't. One reads because the other one can't. One manages all the pills because the other one can. I mean, it's this sacrificial love. But how do you have to go through all those other stages of the love that's in your belly, and the love that's then distant but connected, and the love that then matures to then become a sacrificial love? And if we looked at my curiosity is, if we looked at our Christian life journey in that way, how would that change the way we were in the world? If we realize that when you first encounter the love of God, you have that, gosh, this is amazing and I love this. And then you go through a period where you're like, okay, I'm just figuring it out. I got it. It's good. And then you go through another period where like, well, I'm kind of distant from this love and this God. And maybe you stop attending church for a little while. And then something pulls you back into that rhythm of that relationship with God again. I don't know. It's an interesting curiosity of. So we have a postscript. As we were having this conversation, Carrie raised a challenge, and we never want this. This doesn't have to be a agreement space. It gets to be a disagreement space. So you raised a criticism, which was fantastic.
Yeah, I think there was just a lot of assumptions made about a married life and what a normative marriage relationship over time looks like. And I was just thinking about people who are listening and who may not have children, so don't know that particular experience of disconnecting from a partner. And yet many relationships that we have with friends or life partners people who we go to church with for years and years and years, that we go through those different stages,
Yeah.
and always asking the question, like, am I putting this other person first? What are the ways that I am sacrificing? So I was just kind of challenged by the marriage heteronormative way you were describing it.
Well, and so it's important, I think, to recognize on Sundays in the sermons, I've intentionally not made it about marriage. I really, really tried to use very specific language about relationships. And what I meant to do with that example was to say, here's the example of the way relationships change over time. Sure. And the deeper you go in the relationship, the longer you're in it, the longer you stick with it, it has the potential to lead to a place where that self-sacrificing love becomes felt in a different way. Yeah. It's most noticed in a standard heteronormative marriage. But I appreciate the invitation that we should see that as an example, not the norm, and see that there are a host of relationships and ways we're in relationship that look different. And we never want an example to exclude someone. I remember when I first started preaching, I gave an illustration. I don't even remember what the illustration was, but it was something about a server in a restaurant. And I remember a colleague of mine came up and said, you really kind of demean servers, and anybody in your congregation who is a server or works in a restaurant, you really just took them right out of that sermon because you were demeaning their role. And so I really appreciate when people go, I heard something different there. And the invitation for me as a pretty privileged person to recognize that privilege in the world and to continue to work intentionally towards not having that privilege come through.
Yeah. I also love that just even in this like disagreement, I kind of knew where you were going and what you were wanting to do, but maybe others wouldn't. And there was also a point where I did not know where you were going. And and then that wasn't clear. And so to be able to come back and say, will you just be clear about what you're saying?
No,
so it's pretty awesome.
I appreciate that.
That's
Gosh, is that
a real relationship? Like that's exactly.
Is humility working here?
Wow, isn't that something?
All right.
Love it.
We invite you to go into the world. We hope this podcast helped you deepen your understanding. If you want to disagree with us, dive into something deeper, please do not hesitate to reach out to either of us or any pastor here at First United Methodist Church. We invite you to go into the world to be grace, to live grace, and to share grace. See you Sunday.